Hello, this is the RPG Pundit, the final boss of internet shitlords. Today, I guess I've gone a little heavy on the Sword and Caravan. Maybe that's because I'm playing it this weekend. There's Heroes and Villains of the Silk Road. This is a collection of the history and biography of the Silk Road in terms of a whole bunch of historical figures, including good old Genghis Khan there, and many others that you can use as NPCs for your Sword and Caravan campaign, or any other campaign for that matter. Social Encounters on the Silk Road is a book that I wasn't ever going to do in print, but the PDF was so popular and people asked for it in print, and so I felt like I had to do it. And my publisher agreed, because it's a very, very thin, very tiny book, but it is a guide to how do you handle social encounters, social interactions with NPCs, that is based not on a bunch of complicated social skills or social combat or other social mechanics of those types, but on the reaction roll, your charisma, and how you're actually role-playing it, and what are the factors that will modify the results of that, So it does it through the in-session playing and the in-game playing, which is very important. One of these days, I'm still going to get around to doing a video on metacurrency, and I'm going to explain, for example, how in some ways things social skills are a kind of a fake metacurrency, right? But anyway, there's also the Old School Companion 1, which I think is a platinum bestseller, if I'm remembering correctly. It's the first of the three. All three of the Old School Companions are amazing resources for you to use, whether you're playing Lion and Dragon or Baptism of Fire or any other OSR game, because you can add a whole bunch of medieval elements. Like there's new magic stuff there. That magic stuff is plug and play into your setting, right? You won't have to do any really significant changes, because like if you're using Vancian magic, you can just keep using it and use this other stuff, right? There's adventures in the second book. The third book has a whole bunch of the more weirder and unusual spells, magic of the Middle Ages, The first book has all the grimoires and things like that. It's also got all kinds of guides to like the culture, economics, and society of the Middle Ages. It's just a fantastic resource if you want your campaign to be more medieval authentic, right? To feel more like a real kind of medieval world. Okay, so I'm getting to the point now of this video, and the thing about this video is I was doing my previous video on the D&D starter set, and at one point in that video I had commented about how basically the Keep on the Borderlands in the artwork of the new set is so unbelievably multicultural, right? It has like every color of the races, right? Like there are like Maori people there, and there's like Chinese people, and there's black people, and there's white people, and there's there's every mix in ridiculous varieties, right? In fact, like the one thing you don't find, at least I have yet to see a single piece of art coming from that starter set that shows a regular human white male, right? That I have not seen, right? But everything else is there, right? And of course, then there's like the tieflings and stuff like that, right? But the point is, I said that has more diversity than could literally be possible in that kind of a society. And this is something that I want to talk about here, right? In D&D, in postmodern woke D&D, you have everywhere, apparently. It has to be everywhere, right? Because this is their idea. Their vision of a world, of an ideal world, is one that everywhere you are, whether you're in London or France, or whether you're in the Kalahari Desert, or the South Pole, right? or in the deepest jungles of Peru, right? Everywhere you go has to have complete and total racial and sexual diversity. Okay? And they think this is normal. And of course, the thing is, if you're in a postmodern 21st century Western country, that can be normal, right? Especially if you're in a big city. You just you just assume, right, that everywhere is going to just be that way, right? That there's going to be all the different colors of the rainbow, all these different people, right? Not in the same proportion, so they still get that kind of wrong, right? Because they go out of their way to make it completely proportionally balanced. But it makes a world that's ultra unrealistic, right? I know now you're going to hear someone say, "Oh, but this is a world where there's magic misses," so what does it matter? Well, it does matter, because there are things that are internally explainable in the world and things that aren't. If you want to have a frontier fort in a medieval society that is filled with people of all multitudes of different ethnic groups, of different ethnic cultures, that are all coexisting there at once, you have to explain how that came to happen, right? And so, okay, do you want to say it's magic? Well, it could be magic, but then you have to explain it. What happened? Was there like some kind of mega spell that struck the world, and in the setting where this game is set, when someone's born, they could be any race, right? Like the race won't be the same race as your parents. Like, is everybody just born a random race? And by race now, I'm not meaning D&D race, right? I'm meaning like, that your parents, one of them is black and the other one is white, and you're gonna come out looking Asian, right? Like that could explain it, I guess, if you want to say magic is the explanation. If you want to say, well, no, but people could just travel, right? Well, yeah, okay, it is in ancient times there was migration of a sort. Here's Genghis, right? He engaged in one of the largest migrations in the world, in which he massacred a huge percentage of all humanity at that moment. He then also proceeded to father a whole bunch of descendants of his all over the world. Right? Like 14% of human beings alive today are descended from Genghis Khan. I'm not one of them, but there we are. Because the Polish stopped them, right? But anyway, but that kind of migration doesn't mean you're going to have multiculturalism, right? In no other context has it meant that. Right? It means that you have one particular group that decides that they have to, go over the steppes and through the plains and into the rich valleys and probably mass murder the people who are already there and enslave the rest and then take over. Right? And then you're going to have two groups. You have like the Normans and the Saxons, right? You're going to have a mixture of people, yes, but it's not going to be an egalitarian. They're not going to have the same culture. They're going to have two different cultures, one of which is dominant over all the others, right? Two or more different cultures, I guess you could say, right? But it also still won't explain how you're going to get one of everything, right? It can explain how you got one of one type and one of another type, because type A conquers type B, right? But to have like everything there, as if everywhere in the world was New York or London or Seattle, in 2024, you'd have to, how would you do that, right? So you could say, yeah, that there's magic that lets people travel. There's magical airplanes, right? Everyone can travel on magical. Okay, and why aren't your characters doing that? If there's mass migration everywhere, because you also can't say, oh no, there was mass immigration 3,000 years ago, and everybody now is just descended. Well, you could say, I guess, that. You could try to make that argument. But the fact is that unless you had like some really weird things going on, what that would usually end up happening, especially in a pre-industrial world, is either, okay, best case scenario, there would just be a whole bunch of intermixing, right? And eventually, people would not look like different groups. They would look like one type of group, right? Or one type of kind of their own particular, their own particular tone of that mixed race, right? A collection of mixed races. So if you're trying to claim, no, but this was like long, long ago where people could travel on airplanes, now there isn't any. But now those people were there, and so they stayed there, and now they're mixed, right? They're all together. Then if that happens too soon, you have to ask about the airplanes again. How are they there, right? And if it happened long, long, long ago, you wouldn't be able to know it because everybody would have mixed together already. Possibly with the exception of the other possibility, right? Which is what happens if you got a whole bunch of people of all different races and you have this super advanced technology, a super advanced society, both in terms of technology and in terms of, science and in terms of social ethics, right? That sort can tolerate a multicultural society, a high level of ethics. When that level of ethics collapses, you get into trouble, right? And so obviously, if the airplanes are gone, now there is a dark age. And the other possibility, besides everybody just kind of getting along and intermarrying and then ending up a kind of particular, one particular tone of skin, would be if they didn't get along and there was massive amounts of fights, right? And so one of the reasons why everybody, people might all still look of different races is because they all became insular and xenophobic and opposed to each other, which is the default throughout human history. Throughout almost all of human history, the default has been that people that look different from each other hated each other. Right? It is only in the Western civilization, in the relatively recent past, in the last 400 years or so, that there has been a change in that. Right? I mean, there was also other times when there was a greater time, like the era of the peak classical era, right? The Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, if you went to Rome, not if you went to most other parts, right? But if you went to Rome or one or two other really large metropoli, you would see people of every race there right now, but not in the same numbers. What you would mostly see would be Latins, i.e. Romans. But you'd also see some other people, and you see a lot of them in a place like Rome, because it was one of the centers of the world, right? And the same thing could be said of like 8th century Baghdad, right? And you could say that about, it'd be slightly different, but if you're talking about in China, right, in the peak period of the Song Empire, for example, where they had ships going out, they had ships coming in, they had trade, they had all this international, it would have been, there were Europeans there, right? There were Europeans who went at that same time trying to bring Christianity there, right? So that was actually already happening there. So there would have been in giant metropoli, you can see that, right? And so if you're telling me, well, okay, in the capital of now Karameikos is not a very big place in Mystara, but let's say it's adequate, right? And it is in an area where there's like a lot of movement. So in the capital city, you could imagine there being a variety of different ethnic groups, right? I'm just working right now on the Medieval Authentic City Guide. This will be the next issue, I think, of the Pundit Files, the City Guide to Krakow, and this is Krakow in 1025 AD, right? Very, very early, right? In the beginning of the Polish state, basically. But already then, in Krakow, because it was on a major trade route, because it was the biggest city in the country, there were enclaves of Germans and Bohemians and Italians and Jews, right? And so there was some different peoples there. Now, obviously, there wasn't that much variety in skin tone between any of those people, right? But you also had people coming across from Byzantium, from Greece. There were Arabs that had traveled across. There were people from Al-Andalus and things like that, right? So even in a place like there, which is probably equivalent to like the capital of Karameikos, you still had an opportunity to see some various people of different skin tones and colors, right? But what you never would have had anywhere is a situation where there is an exactly equal number of all races, of all gender preferences, of all sexual identities. All of those are appearing in absolute equal measure, right? That is never happening, and there is no explanation. And so having magic missiles in a setting does not destroy the setting. If you explain, there's magic and there's magic missiles. Magic missiles is a spell that explains it, right? There's one of every color of person in exact proportions in this society that is pre-industrial, where most people are peasants living in mud huts. How the hell do you explain that? You don't. This is not consistent within the world. And that's the problem, right? That is where the problem comes in. That's why that feels wrong and Magic Missile does not. Why you can have elves, right? But if you have this, you can't explain it. There's no way you can explain it in the context of the setting, where like in some goddamn village in the middle of nowhere, literally on the borderlands, right? With the most isolated place imaginable, the most hick region, there is this multicultural milieu, right? It's a festival of colors, right? It's just ridiculous. It is being done, clearly, not for reasons of the setting, but for reasons of political positioning in our life, in our world, not in that world, not in the game world, okay? And it's idiotic. So this is why that feels wrong, even though technically in our world it could exist, and something like Magic Missiles can feel perfectly fine, right? And that argument that people make, it's an elf game thing, is stupid. Because in that world, that makes sense. You have the question is not, how fantastical it is. It's how credible you can make it in the world. Okay, you can make magic credible in any fantasy world. It's very easy. You cannot make something credible that you can't account for, that you can't explain why it is like that. Right? So again, the most logical answer, based on just looking at the art and the characters in the new Keep on the Borderlands, in the Heroes of the Borderlands set, would to me be that everybody in that game world is born a random race. They do not look like their parents, right? They just randomly, pop out and, oh, look, it's a Maori this time, right? And then, your brother was black and your sister was white, and because there something went horribly wrong with human genetics millions of years in the past, and it meant that now we have, a skin tone that shifts, that depending on at the moment of birth, right? That means that children will not look like their parents, That's the best explanation you could possibly make for it. And it's a ridiculous explanation, right? But there you are. But it's more credible than anything they would try to argue, right? Because what they want to try to argue is that in a pre-industrial, medieval society, where there are literal mud hut dwelling peasants and super powerful wizards, everybody lives in this egalitarian wonderland run by Antifa, right? That's what they want to argue. And it's ridiculous, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make sense in the real world, and it doesn't make sense in that one either. So I guess that's everything I wanted to say. And if you like this video, please share it anywhere you think people find it interesting, or anywhere that people will get pissed off about it, because that's the best fun. And if you like the cut of my jib, please check out my products. Somebody recently subscribed to me on Patreon. They put in a Patreon subscription, and that's very nice. But the Patreon subscription doesn't do anything. Just so you know, just a heads up. I mean, they send me money, right? Which is wonderful. It's very nice. It's a way of having an easy way to give me if you want to give me a tip every month, right? Which is lovely, and I very much appreciate it. But I just want you to know that you don't get anything special from my Patreon site. I don't do anything with it, right? But if you've bought all of my books, or you don't really like my books, but you like, or you don't really play D&D or something like that, but you still like my videos and for some reason want to support me, well, you can do that, right? But otherwise, check out my products, right? My RPGs are not political. There's politics inside the world, but they're not based on real world politics, and they're not commentaries on real world politics. They're not right-wing 2025, just like theirs is left-wing 2025. No, my games are set in a setting in a world, and that world is what you get in it, right? Mostly historical, but sometimes fantasy. And I'm sure you're not going to get disappointed if you enjoy old school gaming, and there's something for you, whether you want to play like really hardcore medieval authentic historical campaigns, or whether you want to play something that is more like gonzo fantasy or science fiction or modern day horror, or I've got some of all of those. So please check them all out. I'm sure you're going to enjoy them. Check out at the Red Room store, the Pundit Files. The current Pundit Files is still the setting book, not setting, but the overview book for my upcoming Sons of Heaven campaign, my sci-fi setting that I've been slowly putting into the Pundit Files. And it lets you see an overview of what kind of the basic history and what the galaxy is like there in this setting that I've described as space opera in a galaxy that has just gone through a civilizational collapse, right? So be sure to check that out. Check out any of my products, and I guess we'll see you next time. Currently smoking. This is a Stanwell bent apple plus Argento roots.